Hello, it's Gwen Ifill here for my little Facebook chat with all of you today. Thanks for joining me on a Thursday afternoon instead of a Friday night to sit here and talk a little bit about Washington Week's big anniversary. We're going to be 50 next year, so we decided to get started with the year of conversations with you and everybody else about what the past 49 years have been like. Let me tell you, I haven't been here for all of them, but I've been here for a lot of them as a panelist and as moderator starting in 1999. And I'm thrilled to be here to help celebrate this great big milestone. So come along with us and help us celebrate too. We are going to take some of your questions for a little while, and some of you have thoughtfully sent some in early, but if you have some now, send them to us and we'll answer it on the fly as we go. Kind of exciting. You also get a little look at my office. This is kind of where I live. This is all of our award-winning journalism up here, which frankly, that's all that we can fit because there are even more awards than that, and they're not for me, they're for the show. You know, if you watch Washington Week, that it's really about doing journalism at its best, and we have a shortcut, which is we get the smartest, most interesting, most engaged journalists in Washington and invite them to what I call my sandbox on Friday nights, and we pick apart the news of the week. Do you think there's a little bit of news going on right now? We think so. Let's take up some of your questions. The first one is from Chris, who asks, what's the best part of taking Washington Week on the road? Here's the thing, mostly during election years, we get to leave Washington and we get to take the entire show lock, stock, and barrel and take it in front of audiences and bring panelists with us and talk about the news. We just got back a few weeks ago from Milwaukee, the day after the Milwaukee Democratic debate that Judy Woodruff and I moderated. And we had an audience full of folks in Milwaukee who wanted to talk about politics, which is something we kind of like. So we did that, and it takes us out of our bubble. It has us understand what it is other people are talking about and thinking about, and we have a lot of fun with it. So that's one reason. Another question here from Robert. Why are there not more minority guests on Washington Week? The subject matter, he asks, does not have to involve racial or ethnic issues because there are talented minority women and men, particularly African Americans, in a wide variety of fields. It's a good question, Robert, and you have happened into one of my pet peeves. The thing about Washington Week is we invite reporters who are covering big beats in Washington to come on our program. For whatever reason, unfortunately, in my opinion, a lot of big news organizations haven't done the best job they could in recruiting people of color to cover those beats. You can walk into the White House press room, you can walk up into Capitol Hill, and I think we lost you. Hi, I'm sorry, we're back. I hope you've been hanging in there with us. I'm here with Washington Week's 49th anniversary, working up on our 50th year. I'm Gwen Ifill. If you logged in and you don't know that, what a surprise. We have a couple of questions that we want to take that some of you sent in advance, and we'll take some questions as they come in over the line here as well. Brett writes from Facebook, never miss a week. I even take a break from my beloved baseball games on Friday nights for them. Brett, I send you my sincere and real thanks, because I know a lot of people who tell me stories about what they do on Friday nights, and if it doesn't involve watching Washington Week, I don't want to hear the answer. Another question comes from Dano, also from Facebook. If the Republicans succeed in obstructing President Obama's Supreme Court nomination, what will the impact be on GOP legislators up for election in November? Thank you kindly, and I never miss Washington Week. Well, Dano, here's the interesting thing. You have to watch Washington Week Friday night to really get the best answer to this question, because that is one of our key questions, which is how much of this Supreme Court showdown that we're seeing between Senate Republicans and the president is going to end up affecting what happens in a lot of Senate races, a lot of House races, and then you add up on top of that a presidential race, which is incredibly in your face, as you probably know. And so we don't know. It depends how they treat these nominations. I tell you what you should prepare yourself for. A lot of trial balloons in the next few weeks. A lot of people saying they're being considered who aren't. A lot of people who aren't being considered who are. And then we'll see whether the president actually sends a nomination and what the Senate does with them. It's going to be a very dramatic day when that happens. Another question is from Gretchen, who wants to know, what do you consider the biggest surprise of this election cycle? Come on, Gretchen, you know the answer to that. None of us, I don't care who you're talking to, who claims that they saw Donald Trump coming. If they tell you that, they're pretty much lying, or they're Donald Trump. Even Donald Trump sometimes seems surprised that he got this far. It's been an amazing year. All the rules are out the window. This is my 8th presidential campaign, and I've never seen one that didn't play by the rules as aggressively as this one, mostly because of the appearance of Donald Trump. I think even other Republican candidates are trying to figure out what to do at this crossroads, And it provides full employment for me, Gretchen, because there's always something new to say and something new to understand. I find it fascinating. We don't know what's going to happen. Vince also writes it on Facebook. He wants to know about campaign money and what happens to it. And one of the questions he asks, you only get one, Vince, sorry about that. If money goes to TV ads, what do TV stations do with the revenues? Pay reporters more, build nicer studios, end up with the owners and recycle in the next election? The truth is, it's income, it's revenue. And it is. I have been to more than one TV station which has ended up building a nicer studio. I don't know if they pay their staff more, but the truth is that when you make more money, you get to spend it the way you like. And there's nothing like an expensive television ad to make sure that you're making more money. That is true. Okay, Cheryl wants to know, are there any Oscar movies you're rooting for? And she wants to know whether I have any thoughts on the fact that no black actors were nominated. I have lots of thoughts about that last question, but let's say I answer your first. I went to see a lot of the movies this year, not all of them. And my favorite so far, perhaps because it's what I do for a living, is the movie Spotlight. It was all about, if you didn't see it, about an intrepid band of Boston Globe journalists who unmasked the Catholic Church in Boston, especially the priest sexual abuse scandal. And the way the story is told reminded me of why we get into journalism in the first place. They dug deep, they knocked on doors, there was foot leather, there was research, there was paperwork, and they actually did it the old-fashioned way. They didn't set out to prove something they believed to be happening. They set out to prove a point, and in the end affected the lives of scores and scores of young men mostly who were victims of priests, and actually brought some of them up on charges. The Catholic Church is still paying out in many cities around the country based on charges that have been brought against them. And as a result, it actually changed people's lives. And I think that's what journalism does at its best.
There's a question here from Peter who says, do you think that the current GOP race proves that money in politics is not as influential as it was once thought?
Peter, the question is whether money in politics is not as influential. I think money in politics is still hugely influential, but I have to tell you that, super PACs may not be as influential as we thought. We were playing by the rules of the last war in 2012, 2008. Rich people could put all of their money into little pockets and basically finance candidates who otherwise may not have had a chance, as long as there was no coordination between them. This year, one of the biggest beneficiaries of a super PAC, Jeb Bush, dropped out of the race last week. Now, there's a couple ways of looking at this. Did Jeb Bush drop out because he was a bad candidate, or did he drop out because the money doesn't work? I think money still works. I still think you can't just walk off the street and get involved in this. It's still a very expensive process. And the reason why most candidates end up dropping out is not because their ambition has gone away, but it's because they've decided that they really need to be able to afford to continue. So when you see a candidate drop out, understand that lack of money is as important a deal as too much money.
Also, Charlie Ide says, who's your favorite lighting director?
Oh, my favorite lighting director is Charlie Ide, but I can't don't tell him I said that because he gets he takes it so personally. I have a question from Quinn, who wants to know what impact millennials are going to have on the upcoming presidential election. That remains to be seen. Every 4 years, every 6 years, you name every election, we said this is going to be the year of the woman, or this is going to be the year of the young voter. And in a way, it seems that way for a moment, especially early on, as it's only February in the process. But what only matters is if they show up. This year is a lot of discussion about will Latino voters show up and what effect will they have. There is a lot of discussion in places like South Carolina and the South of African American voters. And I have to tell you, in 2008, when President Obama was elected, we didn't know what effect that would have until the actual election occurred. So I'm putting a pin on that, my thumb on the scale, and watching it to see how it turns out. But I would hate for you to hold it against me if I got it wrong this early on. Okay, another question from Barry, who wants to know. He says he loves the show. Okay, Barry, you're going to get your question answered. I understand, he writes, how journalists such as yourself make immense efforts to be objective and impartial, but is there a line which a politician might cross that would make this impossible? So you're saying if someone like curses or swears or calls me a name on television, will I lose my impartiality? Probably not. The truth is, I think that my goal is to be fair. I think everybody brings with them their point of view about things in life. But I think that our job as journalists and as people job is to broker our understanding, is to stay out of it as much as possible. And that's to say, always have another question. Always assume the other person might have a point, that maybe they're right. Even if secretly you might vote another way, I still am really curious about what it is that people believe. And you can't do this job if you're not curious. So to me, once you make up your mind, then you can't really ask the question. That's different for opinion journalists. But for me, the sweet spot is trying to get an answer to the question. And I don't think you do that by forming your opinion before you have a chance to. Brian wants to know, what are the chances Obama's pick for SCOTUS will get a hearing and confirmed? I have to say, as we speak here today, live on Facebook, Brian, not great. Right now, lots of gauntlets have been thrown down. The president's promised to do his job, which is sending a nomination, that's what the Constitution says, to the Senate. The Senate has said otherwise, which is that if the president is a lame duck, which used to be described as the period between the actual election and the inauguration, now they've decided to expand that to mean 11 months before. They're just not going to accept it. They say this would go against the will of the people. I don't quite see where the middle ground is for something like that, how they come up with a solution that both sides would agree on, but it's going to be an epic battle, and the kind of battle which I think that is going to change the way we view Supreme Court nominations and maybe presidencies for years and decades to come. Raganzu wants to know, says he or she is a huge fan. I'm sure I'm a fan of yours as well. Can you tell us what has been the most personally engaging story for you on Washington Week? I think there have been a couple, but the one that comes to mind most easily was the week of 9/11. Needless to say, the city, the country, the world was transfixed in the wake of that. We, the night of 9/11, went and did a special Washington Week show that night live. We felt the overwhelming need, especially at PBS, to explain the unexplainable. We had reporters who had been covering the story all day, were literally covered in ash, because of course there were attacks here in Washington. And they really paid close attention to the story. And in addition to that, we gathered together a lot of our reporters later that week and had a big roundtable discussion with many of us talking about 9/11. And 10 years later, we did it again. So that was one of those stories which continues to reverberate. A lot of our policy discussions are affected by what happened on that day. And it certainly made us feel that our presence on the PBS schedule was worthwhile, because people were dying for answers, and we didn't have them, but we did have some explanations, and we had the kinds of reporters who were in the position to give those explanations. I'll take another question from online.
Yes, so we have a question. Do you think that the perception of John Kasich will change because he defunded Planned Parenthood in Ohio?
It will change. Well, I don't think so, because the people in Ohio knew this is what he believed. John Kasich, however, is not well known to the on the national stage. If you're a Democrat who was thinking about voting for John Kasich and you believe in supporting Planned Parenthood, maybe this would change your mind. But that's a pretty small subset. I think that right now he's running in a Republican primary, and in a Republican primary you want to speak to Republican values. And for many Republicans, Planned Parenthood has now gotten a mark on it. So the interesting thing, of course, in that is that we have Donald Trump, who is actually the front runner, not defending Planned Parenthood, certainly not when it comes to abortion services that it provides, but defending its health care services, which has always been Planned Parenthood's strongest defense. We do other things for women. And he is a Republican, and he is the front runner in the race, so it will be interesting to see whether he and John Kasich can agree to engage on that pretty fundamental disagreement.
This one might be a good one to wrap up with, too, from Elle. When can we expect your next book?
Well, Elle, let me tell you, my first book, which I would hold up and point to if I had it handy, because I think it's never a bad idea to promote your book, was called The Breakthrough: Politics and Race in the Age of Obama. I wrote it right after President Obama was, it was published right after President Obama was inaugurated in 2009. But I have to tell you, I started that book because I had spent a career covering what I call breakthrough politicians, people who had done really interesting things in their lives and had almost always been told it's not your turn yet, it's not time, and yet had run for mayor and had run for city council and had run for state house. And as it happened, the year I was writing this book, we're running for president. At the time I started this book, at the time the publishers accepted it, nobody actually thought Barack Obama might win, but he seemed like an interesting example of the case I was making. By the time the book hit the shelves, we had a new president, and he was the first African American president. So it was an interesting book to write in real time. It was also the hardest thing I've ever done, because I continued to work full time covering an election that year, and then got it published at the same time, and then went on book tour. It was a hard year. I'm glad I did it. If I ever felt as passionately and as uniquely positioned to tell a story as I did that year, I would write another book. But right now, I think I've got my hands full. So thanks, everybody, for joining me for our little Facebook chat. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. 50 years of Washington Week coming up. We can't believe it. We feel like not a day over 5. Or in my case, not a day after 16 or 17, which is how many years I've had the good luck and the good fortune to do this job and to come into your homes and tell you the story, and come online and tell you what you need to know this week. So tune in tomorrow night. Watch us. We have a great show lined up. We're going to talk about what can you imagine? What won't we talk about tomorrow night? Supreme Court, Guantanamo, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio. I don't think we'll be able to get into a half an hour, which means you'll have to then tune into the webcast where we pick up where we left off afterward. It's fun for me, and I hope it's fun for you. Thanks for coming to play.